On the courthouse steps, my ex-husband's mother asked me how it felt to walk away with one suitcase and nothing else. Diane Hale smiled as if she had rehearsed the line in front of a mirror. Behind her, Grant slipped on his sunglasses and opened the passenger door of the black SUV I had spent 4 years paying for. "Don't waste your sympathy, Mom," he said. "Naomi has always known how to live small." The woman waiting inside the SUV laughed. Sloane Mercer was wearing an ivory silk dress and the diamond collar Grant had bought her with a corporate card. Their wedding was scheduled for that evening at the Halcyon Grand Hotel, 3 hours after our divorce became final. I tightened my hand around the suitcase handle and gave them exactly what they wanted to see, a tired 41-year-old woman in a plain gray coat, standing alone outside the Mecklenburg County Courthouse with everything she owned packed beside her. Grant kissed Sloane through the open door. Diane made sure I saw it. Then the SUV rolled away, carrying all 3 of them toward the life they believed my silence had purchased for them. I sat on a stone bench, opened my phone, and made 3 calls. The first was to my attorney, Priya Shah. "The decree has been entered," I said. "I just got the notice." "Are you sure you want every protection activated today?" "Every one. And the authorized user cards, notify the South Park building that Grant's occupancy ended at noon, and release the audit hold." There was a pause. Priya had known me long enough to understand what that meant. The whole file? The whole file. No courtesy warning. My second call was to the board secretary at Lumiverde Dermal Sciences. "Schedule an emergency meeting for 7 o'clock tomorrow morning," I told her. "My voting trust expires at midnight. Put executive succession and Grant Hale's employment on the agenda." "Under whose authority should I issue the notice?" "Mine. Use my full title." My final call was to the banquet manager at the Halcyon Grand. "The Hale Mercer reception is secured by an additional card on my account," I said. "That authorization is withdrawn." The manager sounded alarmed. "Would you like us to cancel the event, Ms. Whitmore?" I looked down at the suitcase. It held 2 sweaters, a pair of boots, and a stack of paperbacks I had packed only for the performance. My real belongings had been moved to my father's guest house 2 weeks earlier. "No," I said. "Let them order anything they want. Just collect payment before you open it." The first time I met Grant, he was standing beside a crooked banner at a regional career fair in Charlotte, explaining confidence to a room full of people who had more experience than he did. I was 36, exhausted, and trying to look ordinary. My father, Henry Whitmore, had suffered a massive stroke 6 months earlier. He had founded Lumiverde in a rented lab outside Durham with one moisturizer formula and a belief that people with chronic skin conditions deserved products that did not feel clinical or cruel. By the time of his stroke, the company employed more than 900 people and sold in 18 countries. I had worked there quietly since college. I knew the production floor, the regulatory files, the distributor contracts, and the names of employees whose children had been born during our busiest years. But I was also my father's only child and the beneficiary of a controlling family trust. The moment he became ill, 2 former partners challenged the trust, claiming he had lacked capacity when he amended it. Our attorneys expected the fight to last years. The board created a temporary voting arrangement and asked me to remain outside public leadership until the succession review was complete. It was not only about litigation. Someone inside the company had begun leaking confidential forecasts. My father believed the leak came from senior management, and he wanted me invisible long enough to learn who was loyal. So I stepped away from the executive floor and took a bland title in operations compliance. My business card said administrative process consultant. I rented a modest apartment. I stopped attending industry galas. Most people assumed I was another mid-level employee with no path upward. Grant liked that version of me. He brought coffee to my booth when the career fair ran late. He listened while I talked about my father's rehabilitation without once asking what my father owned. He said he admired women who did not need attention. Everybody in this room is trying to sound important, he told me. You don't. That's rare. At the time, I mistook being underestimated for being seen. Grant worked in medical device sales. He was bright, charming, and endlessly frustrated that other people had not recognized his potential. In the beginning, that frustration looked like ambition. He remembered the names of servers, sent my father handwritten notes, and insisted on driving me to the hospital after work. Diane was different from the first dinner. She looked at my simple dress, asked what my salary was, and said, "Grant has always attracted women who need rescuing." Grant laughed instead of correcting her. I should have heard the warning in that laugh. We married 14 months later. My father was able to stand for 40 seconds beside me during the ceremony. He squeezed my wrist afterward and whispered, "Kindness shows up when there is nothing to gain. Watch what happens when he thinks he has gained everything." I thought he was being protective. I did not realize he was giving me the last lesson I would need. As part of my father's succession plan, Luma Verde's board offered Grant a regional sales manager position. He believed he had earned it through networking. In reality, my father wanted him observed. The salary was generous, the travel budget was controlled, and the role gave him no access to formulas or family ownership documents. When Grant received the offer, he lifted me off the kitchen floor and spun me around. "Finally," he said. "Somebody at that company understands talent." For 3 months, he was grateful. Then gratitude hardened into entitlement. We moved into a penthouse in South Park held by the Whitmore Family Residence Trust. The trust also owned the SUV and most of the furniture. Grant never read a document if a lawyer said the word benefit near it. He assumed the home, car, and concierge service were executive perks attached to his new title. He started introducing himself as a future vice president. Diane told her friends her son had been recruited to save a failing luxury company. When Luma Verde posted a record quarter, Grant accepted congratulations at a holiday dinner even though his region had missed its target by 11%. At home, the man who once admired my lack of attention began punishing me for it. "Don't wear that to the corporate dinner," he said one night, looking at my navy sheath dress. "You look like support staff." "I am support staff, according to you." "Then at least try not to embarrass me." Diane came to the penthouse every Sunday carrying designer shopping bags. She would drop them beside my chair without asking. "Take these to the guest room, Naomi," she said. "You may as well be useful while Grant earns the money." The first time, I stared at her. Grant touched my elbow under the table. "Just do it," he whispered. "She's old-fashioned." I carried the bags. Not because she had won, but because the company investigation was widening and I was still protecting my father's plan. I had learned that people revealed more when they believed the quiet person in the room did not matter. Every night, after Grant fell asleep, I went into the small study and logged into an encrypted board portal. I reviewed distributor margins, adverse event reports, inventory losses, and spending exceptions. I spoke to the audit committee under the neutral designation of Trust Representative W. 3 board members knew my identity. No one else did. Patterns began to emerge. Grant's travel costs were rising faster than his sales. A pair of new vendors in Delaware were receiving consulting fees without meaningful work product. Expense descriptions had been altered after approval. The chief financial officer, Victor Lang, dismissed each anomaly as growth friction. "Grant is aggressive," Victor told the audit committee. "Aggressive sales leaders create messy paperwork." My father, still struggling to form full sentences, listened from his rehabilitation room. When the call ended, he wrote 2 words on a yellow pad: "Keep watching." So I watched. Grant began traveling with a new intensity. Chicago, Miami, Nashville, Phoenix. His calendar said distributor meetings, but the meetings produced no contracts. He came home smelling of hotel soap and expensive perfume, then criticized the groceries I bought. A woman without a real career should understand budgets, he said while opening a bottle of wine charged to Lumaverde. I can't carry both of us forever. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked whether he wanted pasta or salmon. The proof of his affair arrived in the pocket of a tuxedo jacket. I was taking it to the cleaner when I found a printed receipt folded behind his phone. A diamond and emerald collar, $42,800. The purchase date matched a weekend Grant claimed he had spent negotiating with a hospital network in Chicago. The recipient line contained 2 initials, SM. I sat on the edge of our bed with the receipt in my hand and waited for heartbreak to feel dramatic. It did not. It felt cold and precise, like a door locking from the other side. I called the outside investigator retained by the trust. Within 4 days, I had photographs of Grant embracing Sloane Mercer at a restaurant in Miami, entering a resort suite with her in Scottsdale, and kissing her in the parking garage beneath Lumaverde's headquarters. Sloane introduced herself online as a board-certified dermatologist and founder of an exclusive med spa. State licensing records showed no medical license under that name. The second discovery was worse. Grant had charged Sloane's jewelry, hotels, spa treatments, and airfare to Lumaverde's client development budget. He had approved invoices from 2 shell vendors created 8 months earlier. The money moved through a consulting company controlled by Victor's brother-in-law. We can document at least $1.4 million, said Lena Brooks, the outside audit partner. Possibly more. Someone in finance is deleting supporting records after the quarter closes. Can you preserve what remains without alerting them? Yes, but if we move too soon, the person with administrator access may destroy the rest. I looked through the glass wall of my father's rehab room. An occupational therapist was helping him lift a wooden block with his left hand. Grant had called him a vegetable 2 nights earlier because his medical trust would not finance Diane's vacation home. Preserve everything, I said. And follow the money. That evening Grant came home after midnight. He smelled like Sloane's gardenia perfume. He poured himself bourbon and leaned against the kitchen island. Aren't you going to ask where I was? You said you had a client dinner. Good. Jealous women are exhausting. He took a drink. A wife without her own career needs to learn not to complicate the life of the man supporting her. I smiled, turned on the recorder beneath the counter, and warmed his dinner. For the next 7 weeks, I collected everything. I saved recordings of Grant insulting my father, bragging about manipulating expense approvals, and promising Diane that he would soon control the company. I documented his demands that I sign a home equity application on a property he did not own. I watched him lie without correcting him. Silence became the room where he built his own case. When I filed for divorce, I cited separation and irreconcilable breakdown, not adultery. Grant accepted service with visible relief. He had already scheduled his wedding to Sloane for the first available evening after our decree. We can keep this civilized, he told me. I won't come after your little savings account if you leave the penthouse within 24 hours. That's generous. I don't want you homeless, Naomi. I just need a clean start. His proposed settlement waived claims to property titled outside our marital estate. Priya made sure the language was airtight. Grant's attorney urged him to review the attached trust schedule. Grant signed without reading it. He believed the penthouse, SUV, and household accounts belonged to Lumaverde as benefits of his job. He also believed he would keep that job after discarding me. At the final hearing, Diane sat behind him wearing pearls purchased on my card. Sloane waited outside in ivory. Grant testified that we had no meaningful shared property and that I had chosen a simple life. The judge asked me whether I understood the agreement. Completely, I said. When the decree was entered, Grant shook my hand as if he had beaten me in a negotiation. Then his mother followed me onto the courthouse steps and asked how it felt to leave with nothing. By 6:10 that evening, 140 guests had gathered beneath crystal chandeliers in the Halcyon Grand's Magnolia Ballroom. Grant stood beside a 6-tier cake while Sloane posed under an arch of white roses. Diane moved from table to table displaying a diamond bracelet she had bought that afternoon. According to the banquet manager's later statement, Grant tapped his glass and said, "Tonight, the life we deserve finally begins." He ordered a tower of vintage champagne that cost more than some employees earned in a month. The banquet captain asked for payment before opening the bottles. Grant handed over his black card. The terminal declined it. He tried again. Diane offered 2 cards from her wallet. Both were suspended. Sloane handed over a metallic card and whispered that the limit should be high enough. It covered less than 1/4 of the unpaid balance. "This is a bank error," Grant snapped. The hotel manager approached with a printed authorization notice. The primary account holder withdrew permission for all additional users at 3:16 this afternoon. Without a valid payment method, we cannot continue service. Sloane's smile vanished. What primary account holder? Grant had no answer. The band stopped. Servers removed unopened champagne. Guests raised phones. Somebody stringed the argument as Diane accused the hotel of discriminating against successful people. Grant tried to move the party to the bar, but the room deposit had also been reversed after the hotel applied it to outstanding charges he had added that morning. The wedding ended with 3 security officers escorting the family through the lobby while strangers filmed. They drove to the South Park penthouse. The SUV gate did not recognize the vehicle. Building security directed them to visitor parking, where Priya, a civil process officer, and the property trustee were waiting. Grant's right of occupancy had ended under the signed divorce order. His personal belongings had been packed by a bonded service and moved to a storage unit paid through the end of the month. "You can't evict me from my own home," he shouted. The trustee handed him the recorded deed and trust schedule. Grant read my full legal name on every page: Naomi Elise Whitmore, beneficiary and successor trustee. He called me 19 times before midnight. I did not answer. At 6:45 the next morning, he arrived at Lumaverde headquarters wearing yesterday's tuxedo shirt beneath a wrinkled jacket. His badge failed at the turnstile. Security escorted him upstairs, not to his office, but to the boardroom. I was seated at the head of the table in a cream suit. My father's old fountain pen rested beside 12 blue binders. Victor Lang sat halfway down the table, pale but composed. He had not yet realized that several of the binders contained his signatures. Grant stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing in the chairperson's seat?" I looked at the wall clock. It turned 7 o'clock. "Taking the position that became mine at midnight," I said. "My name is Naomi Whitmore. I am the controlling shareholder and executive chair of Lumaverde Dermal Sciences." For several seconds, no one moved. Diane had followed Grant into the room despite security's instructions. She gripped the back of a chair, staring at the portrait of my father on the far wall and then at me. "Whitmore," she whispered. "As in Henry Whitmore?" "His daughter." Grant gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is insane. You process invoices." I reviewed operations while a family trust dispute and an internal investigation were underway. "You saw a quiet job and decided to find me." He looked from face to face, searching for someone willing to join his version of reality. No one did. I opened the first binder. Inside were photographs of him and Sloane, card statements, travel reports, and approval logs. I opened the second. It contained vendor registrations for Northstar Market Strategies and Arden Clinical Partners, both linked to Victor's brother-in-law. The third held preserved server records showing that expense attachments had been deleted through Victor's administrator credentials. "Your employment is terminated for cause," I told Grant. "All severance and unvested incentives are forfeited under the fraud provision in your contract." The company filed civil claims at 6:30 this morning. The evidence has also been referred to state and federal investigators. Grant's face changed. The surprise vanished first. Then the injured husband vanished. What remained was the man I had heard on recordings when he thought no one important was listening. "You set me up." I gave you access, a salary, and trust. You turned them into a theft. You lied about who you were for 5 years. My ownership was protected information. Your marriage vows were not. Diane pointed at me with a trembling hand. You let us spend your money just so you could humiliate us. No. I stopped you after I learned you were spending company money. There is a difference. Victor leaned back and folded his hands. These are serious accusations, Naomi, but raw system logs are not conclusions. We should authorize an independent review before making public decisions. His voice was calm enough to sound reasonable. That was why he had survived under 3 chief executives and 2 boards. I agree, I said. The board authorized one 4 months ago. The door opened, and Lena Brooks entered with 2 members of her forensic team. Victor's left eye twitched. Until that review is complete, you are placed on administrative leave. Your access has been suspended, and company devices must remain here. Victor rose slowly. You are allowing a personal divorce to destabilize a public-facing company. No. I am preventing 2 executives from using a divorce to conceal corporate fraud. Grant slammed his palm against the table. You would be nothing without your father. I stood. My knees were shaking beneath the table, but I kept my voice even. Maybe. But you were given every advantage by mine, and you still chose to become a thief. Security escorted Grant and Victor to separate elevators. Diane followed Grant, shouting that my family had entrapped a hardworking man. Employees gathered behind glass walls as they passed. For years, Grant had told them he was practically family, that he had been chosen for leadership, that the Whitmores relied on him. Now they watched him leave without his badge. I expected relief. Instead, I felt exposed. My secret was no longer a shield. By noon, my photograph was on business sites beside headlines about the founder's hidden daughter. Reporters waited outside the building. Employees searched old memories for every time they had dismissed me or spoken freely in my presence. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked frightened. I called an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. I understand why this morning feels unsettling, I said from the low platform. I worked beside many of you without explaining my ownership. I did that because of active litigation and evidence that company information was being abused. I will answer what I legally can. What I will not do is ask you to carry the cost of crimes committed above you. Payroll, benefits, and current production will continue. A chemist near the front raised her hand. Did you know about the layoffs Victor proposed for the packaging line? I knew. They are frozen pending review. Someone else asked whether Grant had access to employee retirement accounts. No, I said. Those funds are held independently. The questions lasted 47 minutes. I did not make a victory speech. I did not mention the wedding disaster. By the end, people were still nervous, but they were listening. Grant was not. He found Sloane's apartment empty that afternoon. Her closets had been cleared, the med spa office she claimed to own was locked, and the website listing her as a physician had disappeared. She had transferred $186,000 from an account they shared and boarded a flight to Fort Lauderdale under the name Celeste Morgan. The diamond collar was gone too. Grant called me from the apartment. Did you do this? Do what? Scare Sloane away. Freeze her business. Take her money. I did not create her fake credentials, Grant. I also did not give her access to your account. You knew she was using another name. I discovered it while investigating your misuse of company funds. His breathing went ragged. You should have warned me. I closed my eyes. Even then, after the affair, the theft, and the courthouse performance, he believed my duty had been to protect him from the woman he chose over me. You had a wife who warned you every time she asked where you were, I said. You called her jealous. I ended the call. For 48 hours, it appeared Grant had finally understood that he was cornered. Then Victor showed him how to turn shame into a weapon. Victor had spent decades building relationships with financial reporters, distributors, and minor shareholders. His leave agreement barred him from company systems, but it could not erase the favors he had accumulated. He connected Grant with a crisis publicity firm called Northline Reputation. Their first video appeared on a Sunday morning. Grant sat in a modest rental house wearing an open-collar shirt. There was no jewelry, no polished table, no sign of the life he had shown off for years. He looked directly into the camera with red eyes. "For 5 years, I lived under financial control," he said. "My wife hid her identity, monitored my movements, and used money to isolate me. The moment our marriage ended, she took my home, my transportation, and my career. Now she is calling me a criminal because I tried to rebuild my life." He cried at exactly the right moment. Northline released selected audio clips of me refusing to sign the home equity application. They omitted the section where I explained that Grant did not own the property. They posted photographs of me entering private board meetings and described them as secret sessions where I planned his destruction. Diane gave interviews from a friend's living room. "Naomi pretended to be humble," she said. "She studied our family like an experiment. My son was never allowed to make a decision without punishment. The story was irresistible. A secret heiress who married an ordinary man, deceived him for years, and destroyed him when he escaped." Within 3 days, #boycott Lumiverde was trending regionally. Protesters gathered outside headquarters holding signs that said abuse is not empowerment. A national beauty retailer paused a spring launch. 2 distributors suspended negotiations. Customer service lines filled with threats. I knew the allegations were false. That did not make them harmless. At an emergency board session, Director Calvin Marsh pushed a printed article across the table. "Perception is outrunning evidence," he said. "You need to take temporary leave. If I step away now, Victor controls the narrative and the records. If you stay, we may lose 3 more accounts by Friday." Another director, Elaine Porter, would not meet my eyes. A neutral interim chair could lower the temperature. Neutral chosen by whom? No one answered. The voting trust had expired, giving me control, but control was not the same as confidence. Several small shareholders had granted Victor proxy authority before his suspension. If he convinced enough directors that I was a reputational threat, he could force a special meeting, remove my executive authority, and gain time to destroy what the audit had not yet secured. I refused to resign. The board voted 5-4 to demand an independent governance review within 10 days. When the meeting ended, I walked into the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and shook so hard that my teeth clicked. I had imagined exposing Grant would feel like stepping into daylight. Instead, every private humiliation had become public theater, rearranged until he was the victim and I was the woman punishing him for leaving. My father called from his home. His speech had improved, but each sentence still cost him effort. "Come, here," he said. I drove to the rehabilitation cottage behind his house. He sat near the window under a plaid blanket, a tablet open to one of Grant's interviews. "I should have told him from the beginning," I said. "Maybe none of this would have happened." My father tapped the screen off. "Truth doesn't build character," he said slowly. "It reveals it. The company could pay for my mistake. Then protect the people. Not your pride." That was the difference between my father and Grant. Grant thought ownership meant the right to consume. My father thought it meant the obligation to remain when consumption threatened everyone else. I returned to headquarters after midnight. The building was nearly empty. From the executive floor, the lights of Charlotte looked steady and indifferent. On my desk sat a box I did not recognize. Inside was a cracked external drive, a sealed envelope, and a note printed in block letters. Victor did not start with Grant. Ask what happened to Meridian Labs. I called security. The cameras showed a man entering with valid contractor credentials 23 minutes earlier. He was still in the building. We found him in the old records room on the 11th floor. He was tall, in his early 40s, with a charcoal jacket folded over one arm. When security raised their radios, he placed both hands where they could be seen. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said. "Henry Whitmore hired me 9 months ago. If Victor learns I am here, the remaining evidence disappears." I knew the name. Adrian was a forensic accountant who specialized in procurement fraud, but his contract had been listed under outside compliance review. My father had never told me the assignment was active. Why leave a mystery box instead of scheduling a meeting? Because 2 people on your legal distribution list report to Victor. I needed to know whether security would call you or them. And? They called you. That's a good start. I should have been offended. Instead, I almost smiled. Adrian opened the envelope. It contained bank certifications from the Cayman Islands, shipping manifests from a closed laboratory, and a deposition transcript dated 14 years earlier. Victor and Grant's father, Raymond Hale, ran the same vendor scheme at Meridian Biotech, he said. My parents owned a small formulation lab that supplied them. Victor redirected payments, Raymond forged acceptance reports, and Meridian collapsed. My parents lost the lab and their home. Raymond died before Grant and I met. Yes. Victor kept the system. When Grant joined Luma Verde, Victor recognized a familiar appetite. He gave him small exceptions, then larger ones. By the time Grant understood he was exposed, Victor owned him. Adrian connected the cracked drive to an isolated laptop. The directory appeared empty. It was wiped, I said. The visible partition was. The controller still holds snapshots. Your former accounting manager copied them before Victor fired her. Where is she? Safe. Scared. Willing to testify if she knows the board cannot bury her again. He recovered the first file. It was a spreadsheet linking Luma Verde vendor payments to accounts used during the Meridian fraud. The second was an audio recording from Northline's studio. Grant's voice filled the room, relaxed and amused. Keep the crying clip. Women buy that stuff. Once the board pushes Naomi out, Victor will sell the sensitive skin formula and we drain the remaining cash before anyone can stop us. Victor laughed. Your father would finally be proud. I stared at the sound wave on the screen. Grant had not merely joined Victor after being exposed. The public attack was part of a plan to seize the company long enough to strip it. Can we authenticate this? I asked. I already have the original recorder and the witness who placed it. But there is a problem. There is always a problem. Victor controls proxy votes representing almost 13% of the non-family shares. Combined with frightened directors, he can still remove you from executive control at the special shareholders meeting next Thursday. If that happens, evidence may become a custody dispute instead of a rescue. I looked at the city again. For 5 years, hiding had been my strategy. It had protected the trust, the investigation, and my father. It had also trained everyone around me to believe I would remain unseen. Then we do not wait for the meeting, I said. Adrian studied me. What do you want to do? Meet every shareholder Victor thinks he owns. Visit every distributor he frightened. Put the records in front of the people whose jobs he plans to sacrifice. That is 6 days of travel and at least 40 conversations. Then we start before sunrise. For the next 6 days, Adrian and I lived out of rental cars, airport lounges, and conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee. We met a retired chemist who owned 0.8% of Luma Verde and remembered when my father mixed samples by hand. We sat in a family pharmacy in Asheville while 3 siblings argued about whether scandal mattered more than evidence. We drove through freezing rain to meet an employee stock representative whose members had received anonymous messages claiming I'd planned mass layoffs. I did not ask anyone to trust my surname. I showed them the numbers. I explained how North Star and Arden invoiced for research that never occurred. Adrian traced the transfers. I showed them Grant's personal charges and Victor's administrator logs. We played only the portion of the audio necessary to prove intent, preserving the rest for investigators. At each meeting, I made the same promise. I cannot guarantee the company will avoid pain. I can guarantee I will publish the independent audit, protect lawful retirement funds, and refuse to save executive reputations by eliminating hourly jobs. Some shareholders gave us their proxies. Some did not. A few said they believed Grant's account of our marriage even while accepting the fraud evidence. Both things could be true, one investor told me. They could, I said. That is why I am not asking you to vote on my marriage. I am asking you to vote on bank records. The answer changed the room. Meanwhile, employees began sending information through a protected channel Adrian established. A procurement analyst provided emails in which Victor ordered her to backdate vendor reviews. A receptionist saved visitor logs showing Grant meeting Northline consultants in Victor's office months before the divorce. A junior chemist found a duplicate access request for the new sensitive skin formula. The most important witness was Marisol Vega, the accounting manager Victor had fired. We met her in a public library outside Raleigh. She arrived with her 12-year-old son and kept checking the windows. Victor said he would make sure I never worked in finance again, she told me. When I refused to rename the payments, Grant said people like me were replaceable. You should not have to risk your son's security to fix what they did, I said. I already lost my job. If I stay quiet, he learns that the threat worked. She signed a sworn declaration and gave Adrian the original backup drive. Before leaving, she turned to me. I saw you in operations 2 years ago. You stayed late helping the returns team when the system failed. I thought you were temporary staff. Most people did. Victor never knew the names of those women. If you become what he is, they will tell the next person the truth about you too. Her words followed me into the shareholders' meeting. The ballroom at the Charlotte Convention Center held more than 300 people. Shareholders filled the front rows. Employees and reporters watched from a separate gallery. Victor arrived through the main doors with 4 attorneys. Grant followed in a dark suit, shaking hands as if he were still a respected executive. Diane sat behind him. She wore no pearls this time. Victor took the lectern before the meeting was formally called to order. This company is being held hostage by a private marital vendetta, he announced. Ms. Whitmore concealed her identity, weaponized corporate resources, and damaged millions of dollars in shareholder value. We are asking for temporary stewardship until an independent investigation can determine whether she is fit to lead. Grant kept his eyes lowered with practiced sorrow. I entered from the side aisle with Adrian, Marisol, Lena Brooks, and 3 representatives elected by employees. The room shifted as people recognized us. Victor smiled faintly. A theatrical entrance does not answer governance concerns. You're right, I said. Records do. The board secretary formally opened the meeting. Victor's attorney objected to every item on the agenda, but the bylaws allowed the controlling shareholder to present evidence before any removal vote. I began with Northstar Market Strategies. On the screen behind me appeared its incorporation record, a mailbox address in Wilmington, and a photograph of the empty suite it supposedly occupied. Then came 26 invoices totaling $612,000 for market research no employee had received. The beneficial owner is the brother-in-law of our suspended chief financial officer, I said. Payments were approved through an exception protocol Victor created and Grant repeatedly used. Victor did not look at the screen. We moved to Arden Clinical Partners. Marisol explained how she had been ordered to change wire descriptions from consulting advance to completed trial services. She showed the original emails, the altered entries, and the termination notice issued 2 days after she refused to sign a false certification. Grant stood. She was fired for performance problems. Naomi paid her to say this. Marisol's hands tightened around the lectern, but her voice remained steady. I have not received $1 from Ms. Whitmore. You offered me $25,000 to delete the ledger and told me my son would be ashamed when I went to jail for your approvals. The room broke into angry conversation. Victor's attorney demanded proof. Adrian displayed the bank withdrawal Grant had made the morning of the offer and security footage showing him carrying the cash envelope into Marisol's office. She had refused it. A camera in the parking elevator recorded him leaving with the same envelope. Then Lena presented the server snapshots. Each deletion was time-stamped. Each administrator session traced back to Victor's encrypted token. Each restored attachment matched a payment to a shell vendor or a personal purchase. I saved Grant's charges for last. The screen showed the $42,800 necklace, resort suites, airfare for Sloan, the ivory wedding dress, and the champagne order from the Halcyon Grand. I hated displaying those details. They reduced the private collapse of my marriage to a spreadsheet, but they also showed exactly how employee and shareholder money had been used. This is not evidence of a bitter wife punishing an unfaithful husband, I said. It is evidence of an executive converting corporate funds for personal use and a chief financial officer concealing it. Grant rushed toward the lectern. Every one of those expenses was authorized. By you or Victor. That is the problem. She is fabricating this because I left her. Adrian looked to me. I nodded. The audio began. Grant's recorded laughter filled the ballroom. Keep the crying clip. Women buy that stuff. Once the board pushes Naomi out, Victor will sell the sensitive skin formula and we drain the remaining cash before anyone can stop us. Victor's reply followed, your father would finally be proud. The silence afterward was so complete that I heard a reporter's camera shudder from the back gallery. Grant stared at the speakers. That's artificial. Anyone can make fake audio now. Adrian produced the original recording device in an evidence bag, along with an authentication report and an affidavit from the Northline technician who had copied the session after refusing to take part in fraud. Victor stood and moved toward a side exit. 2 agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation entered through that door. Federal investigators approached from the rear. Search warrants had been executed at Victor's house and Northline's office that morning. The evidence presented at the meeting was only the portion investigators had cleared for disclosure. Victor's composure finally cracked. You cannot prove I controlled those accounts, he said to the agents. Save it for counsel, one replied. Grant backed away from the lectern until his chair caught behind his knees. He looked at Diane, but she covered her mouth and did not rise. Then he turned to me. Naomi, tell them this is a corporate misunderstanding. You know me. You know I wouldn't steal from your father. I thought of him calling my father useless. I thought of the dinner I reheated while Grant smelled of another woman's perfume. I thought of him standing on the courthouse steps, pleased that I appeared to own nothing. I know exactly what you chose when you thought I had no power, I said. He stepped closer. An agent blocked him. Sloan manipulated me. Victor set up the vendors. I was trying to protect us. Love does not humiliate, steal, or erase. Explain the rest to a jury. Victor and Grant were detained on fraud and evidence tampering warrants. The removal resolution never reached a vote. Shareholders instead voted to terminate Victor, ratify my executive authority, and authorize a fully independent audit with public findings. When the final count appeared, applause rose from the employee gallery. I stood to thank them, but the floor tilted under my feet. The lights stretched into white lines. Someone called my name from far away. I remember Adrian catching my shoulders before my head struck the lectern. I woke in a hospital with a blood pressure cuff around my arm and my father asleep in a chair beside the bed. Adrian stood near the window wearing the same shirt from the meeting, wrinkled now, his tie stuffed into his coat pocket. The company is stable, he said before I could ask. Elaine Porter is handling routine approvals. The audit team has custody of the records. No accounts have been frozen that affect payroll. The retailer? Reopened discussions. Employees? Still employed. Only then did I notice how dry my mouth was. The cardiologist said severe exhaustion and hypertension had triggered the collapse. There was no permanent damage, but the warning was not subtle. You cannot run a company by treating your body like an expendable asset, she told me. My father opened his eyes and nodded emphatically. I spent 6 days in the hospital and another week at his house. For the first time in years, I slept without a phone beside my pillow. Adrian sent one concise update each evening and refused to forward any document that could wait. I began to think the danger had passed. Then a federal magistrate granted Grant conditional release while prosecutors organized the financial case. He surrendered his passport and wore an ankle monitor, but he was allowed to meet counsel and move within a restricted area. Victor remained in custody because investigators found evidence of offshore transfers. During their last private meeting before the arrests, Victor had told Grant about LV-27, Lumaverde's most valuable unreleased formula. The compound was designed for people whose skin reacted to common preservatives. For years of testing had produced a stable version. A licensing agreement could be worth tens of millions. If Grant sold the formula before trial, he could fund an escape, damage Lumaverde's launch, and create doubt about who had first developed it. He contacted a formulation technician named Owen Price. Owen had gambling debts and had once accepted a small cash gift from Grant for rushing samples. Grant believed that made him controllable. Copy the final folder, Grant wrote through an encrypted app. You get $300,000 when the buyer verifies it. Owen did not answer. He walked into Adrian's office the next morning and placed his phone on the desk. I made a stupid choice before, he said. I'm not making this one. Adrian called me while I was still under medical restrictions. You are not coming to the office, he said. That sounded less like a forensic update and more like an order. Call it an aggressively phrased recommendation. We arranged a secure video conference with investigators. The plan was simple enough to explain and complicated enough to frighten me. Owen would appear to accept. Our cybersecurity team would build a decoy repository containing incomplete formula files, unique forensic markers, and a tracking beacon. Grant would receive a tablet configured to preserve every access attempt. The undercover buyer would insist on an in-person verification. No real trade secret leaves the network, the lead federal agent said. If Hale aborts, we still have solicitation and attempted theft. If he proceeds, the transfer is documented. What is the risk to Owen? He will make the handoff in a monitored public parking structure. He will not attend the sale. I authorized the operation as controlling shareholder and then did the hardest thing I had done all month, stayed home. Grant chose an unused distribution warehouse near Greensboro for the sale. He arrived in a rented sedan, ankle monitor hidden beneath his trouser cuff, carrying the tablet in a leather case. The supposed buyer represented a European cosmetics conglomerate and offered $2.5 million in cryptocurrency. Body cameras later showed Grant opening the decoy folder and saying, "This is the entire formula, including the stability data. Once you have it, Lumaverde can't prove priority without admitting I ran the program." He had never attended one LV-27 research meeting. The buyer asked him to transfer the files. Grant tapped send. The screen turned white. A message appeared, access revoked. Attempt preserved. Warehouse lights flooded the room. Agents entered from 3 doors. Grant threw the tablet onto the concrete as if destroying the device could erase a transfer already mirrored to federal servers. That company is mine too, he shouted. I built it. Adrian was present as the corporate evidence custodian. He stayed several feet away while the agents restrained Grant. It was never yours, he said. You confused access with ownership and silence with weakness. The new charges revoked Grant's release. They also changed the public story. Northline's campaign collapsed when its technician described how clips had been edited. News outlets that had repeated Grant's claims published corrections. I refused invitations to give triumphant interviews. Why not tell your side? Elaine asked. I will tell the verifiable part, I said. The audit, the crimes, and what we are changing. My marriage is not a product launch. The final investigation documented $2.1 million in diverted funds, falsified records, wire fraud, coordinated defamation, attempted theft of trade secrets, and obstruction. Victor pleaded guilty and cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony connected Grant to the shell vendors and tied both men to the plan to sell LV-27. The older Meridian records exposed another chain of fraud, though the statute of limitations prevented some charges. The evidence still allowed former suppliers, including Adrian's parents, to recover money from hidden accounts. They did not regain the laboratory they had lost, but they regained the public truth about why it failed. Sloan was found 5 months later in Palm Beach, using the name Celeste Morgan to market injectable treatments without a license. Investigators recovered the diamond collar and client deposits from 11 women. She pleaded to fraud and unlicensed medical practice. Diane sold most of the designer goods she had accumulated to pay Grant's legal fees. Several items had been purchased with Lumaverde funds and were seized as recoverable property. She moved into her sister's small home outside Gastonia and discovered that sympathy faded when the restaurant bills stopped being paid by someone else. She wrote to me once. The letter did not apologize. It said a good wife would have prevented Grant from making bad choices and asked me to withdraw my victim impact statement so he could come home sooner. I sent the letter to Priya and never responded. Grant went to trial on the charges not covered by Victor's plea. His defense argued that he had believed executive perks included broad spending authority and that marital deception had impaired his judgment. The jury took less than 6 hours. He received 12 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release, and was ordered to pay restitution jointly with Victor. At sentencing, he turned toward me with the same expression he had worn on the courthouse steps. You took everything from me, he said. The judge told him not to address me, but I asked permission to answer. No, Grant. The court took what you stole. The rest was never yours. I expected satisfaction. What I felt was quiet. Lumaverde needed almost 18 months to recover. We published the independent audit, repaid legitimate vendors caught in Victor's payment games, and created an ethics office that reported directly to a committee with employee representation. We separated finance access so no single executive could erase supporting records. We also established a family health fund because I had learned, both from my father and my own collapse, that a company cannot call people essential while treating their lives as replaceable. The retailer that paused our launch eventually returned. LV-27 received regulatory clearance and became our most successful product for reactive skin. I refused to put my face in the campaign. The scientists' names appeared in the launch materials instead. The first time I returned to the packaging floor, a line supervisor named Tanya handed me a green notebook signed by everyone on the evening shift. I expected congratulations about the trial or the product. Instead, the messages thanked me for keeping health coverage active during the crisis. One employee wrote that her son had completed chemotherapy without an interruption in treatment. Another said her daughter had stayed in college because her parents had not lost work. I sat on a pallet of empty cartons and cried in front of 30 people. Nobody filmed me. That mattered more than I can explain. Adrian accepted my offer to lead the new Office of Integrity. He negotiated 2 conditions: direct access to the audit committee and the right to tell me when I was behaving like an executive who believed sleep was optional. The second condition seems dangerously broad, I told him. That is why it is useful. We became friends before we became anything else. There were no dramatic rescues and no secret fortunes to reveal. He knew exactly who I was, including the parts one disliked, my tendency to withhold fear until it became illness, my instinct to test loyalty instead of requesting honesty, and the shame I still carried for staying with Grant after kindness had disappeared. Adrian never told me I should have left sooner. People leave when the truth becomes survivable, he said once. You were carrying your father, a company, and an investigation. That doesn't make every choice right. It makes the choices human. I learned his silences too. He had spent 14 years believing that recovering proof of the Meridian fraud would restore his parents' lost life. When the case ended, the money helped, but the old laboratory remained a grocery warehouse and his father still changed the subject whenever chemistry came up. Justice did not reverse time. It gave us a cleaner place to stand. 2 years after the shareholders' meeting, Luma Verde held its anniversary picnic in the garden beside our Durham Research Center. There were no crystal towers, rented celebrities, or cards in someone else's name. Employees brought their families. My father, walking slowly with a cane, judged a children's sunscreen label contest with unreasonable seriousness. At sunset, Adrian asked me to visit the new greenhouse. The research team had built it to study botanicals that could be sourced from small American farms without predatory contracts. He stopped beneath a row of jasmine vines and took a small ring from his pocket. I cannot promise you a life without investigations, he said. You seem to attract complicated spreadsheets. I laughed. That is a terrible proposal opening. I had a better one in the car. He took a breath. I don't want an impressive life borrowed from anyone else. I want the real one we keep choosing when no one is watching. Will you marry me? For a moment, I saw the courthouse suitcase again. I had carried it to make Grant believe I was defeated. At the time, I thought the day was about taking my property back. It took me years to understand that the most important thing I recovered was not the penthouse, the company, or even my family name. It was my right to live without shrinking so another person could feel tall. Yes, I told Adrian. But neither of us walks ahead of the other. Agreed. Unless there is an audit. Then I reserve the right to arrive early. When we returned to the garden, my father raised a glass of lemonade. Tanya started the applause, and soon the entire lawn was on its feet. I did not feel like a hidden heiress or a woman who had won revenge. I felt visible to people who knew the truth and had stayed. Grant had once believed my silence meant I had nothing. Diane believed dignity could be measured by shopping bags and hotel rooms. Victor believed every person had a price if he found the right fear. They were wrong. Money had given me tools, but it did not give me courage. Courage came from Marisol walking into a library with evidence after losing her job. It came from Moen refusing a second bad choice. It came from employees who protected records because they understood the company belonged, in a practical sense, to every family depending on it. It came from my father learning to speak again one painful sentence at a time. I had spent years hiding my inheritance to protect it. In the end, I learned that my real legacy was not what I owned. It was what I refused to let powerful people destroy. If you had been in my place, would you have exposed Grant at the first sign of betrayal, or stayed silent long enough to uncover the entire network behind him?